presentation from Judith Corley-Lay regarding the moving from research to implementation. Judith Corley-Lay became director of the NCPP in April of 2017.
Thank you. It's good to see the last few diehards in the room. I'm going to try and pick up a few points from Jeff's presentation and maybe a few from the LTBP program as well. My topic is on moving from research to implementation. And the reason is that if you look at the history, and this is bridge history now, I've done this presentation. The first time I was asked to develop this presentation was by the equipment group. So I did a little thing for them, and they were happy with it. And then I did it last year at TRB on pavement research implementation, which was what I did when I was with North Carolina DOT, so that was pretty easy. Then I thought, well, I'll do this for bridge. Well, you guys are special. You are so special. Because what I found when I looked at the history of bridge research and bridge research implementation was that there was a direct correlation between a major bridge failure and the subsequent research, which was then implemented. Really good records for example, that 1987 bridge collapse. I think it's Schoharie Creek Bridge, very famous bridge collapse. I think there were 7 fatalities in that collapse. After that, the bridge community got 17 NCHRP projects in less than 15 years. That is just unprecedented. Usually, you can't get something through NCHRP. You get B after A is completed, and so that was just an unprecedented amount of research. Similarly, after the 2007 collapse of the bridge in Minnesota, there was a lot of research that came out on connections and inspecting. In fact, I list a couple of the developments that happened following that, including the move towards the element level inspection. And it turned out, as I looked at this thing, when there was a collapse that resulted in research, that resulted in new guidelines, new recommendations, those things were implemented very quickly. Not necessarily without protest, but quickly. However, and for sure, no one wants to be the next failure. Everybody wants to be ahead of those failures. They want to be doing all the right things so that failure does not happen on their watch. I do understand that completely. However, when it comes to the topics that we're talking about in this meeting in general, those maintenance questions, those preservation treatments, there has been, one, less likelihood, less tendency to support research in those areas, but also a much harder push to try and get things implemented. So I guess the question that I want to broach here is, how do we go about improving our rate of implementation for research that is not this linked to bridge failure, it's not necessarily safety, it really is in fact improving the service life of the bridge. So I want to talk, this is actually a fairly general presentation on implementation, and I just want to clarify some things about implementation. Dissemination is what engineers love to do. We do an NCHRP report. We do a conference presentation. We do some webinars. We do small group training. That's all dissemination. And it's relatively easy to do. Implementation, though, is much harder. Implementation requires that people change what they're doing, change their practices, and that it be in a sustained way. So it isn't once and done, it's over the long haul. And I love this button, change is good, you go first. If any of you saw, was anybody in the room for the presentation from Missouri DOT, the Show Me State? He had this great sign, you know, I'm from Missouri, you gotta show me. It was terrific. Well, he would have loved this button on change is good, you go first. So, we still want to get toward implementation. The other thing that comes up is that there is no really clear link on who is responsible for implementation. Our policymakers, the people in legislatures or in town councils or even in agency leadership, tend to think that it is the practitioners who are working for the agency. People in the agency typically either don't have the tools or the time, or probably both, to really do the implementation work. And the researchers are not always tied in enough to the agency reality to actually help significantly with that implementation. So the result is we get this very jerky, little bit of progress falling back, little bit of progress and falling back. I found a few quotes that I think are really important. One is, we've got to make the right thing to do also the easy thing to do. We have to figure out a way to take the implementations, the concepts, and make them easy enough that they can be implemented. It shouldn't require 5 PhDs and 10 textbooks to figure out how to use a particular piece of information, a piece of research. I love this other one too. Of course, Jeff and I are both from the South, and so we do a lot in the South of train and pray. You go in, you do a training class, everybody goes back to their office, and somebody somewhere is just hoping that somebody actually uses the results. Right? Right. It happens all the time. Well, research has shown that that's generally not effective. So pray and train just doesn't seem to do. In looking at implementation, though, there is a field in medicine that is implementation. It is implementation of case studies. And the reason they've made this a branch of medicine is because those case studies are very, very expensive. Trials are very expensive. They want to make sure that everything that is implementable gets implemented. Well, so I started reading medical stuff on implementation to try and improve, get some ideas on what might work. So I'm going to show you some of these ideas from medicine, but in red on most of the slides, there's something that relates more directly to a DOT agency. For one thing, provide interactive assistance. On this one, if any states in here do any of the SHARP 2 projects, Jeff talked about these. Federal Highway hired a contractor, a consultant, to help the agencies implement the various products. Very, very effective, because a state wasn't sitting there with 5 reports trying to figure out what to do. Someone was helping them guide the process. Next, adapt and tailor to context. I think in DOTs we're pretty good at this. We all know that not every bridge is the same type. We know there's a difference between large states and small states, cold weather climates and warm weather climates. So I think we do a pretty good job at identifying and altering our approach based on context. The developing of stakeholder relationships, though, this is really developing small teams across states to work on implementation activities. One idea, could the MAC, the Committee on Maintenance, Bridge Twig, have an implementation group, a group that meets regularly by telephone, by conference call, to talk about implementation issues. What are the projects that are coming up that look like there's work that could be done? And then notice here, we do still have dissemination, training, and educating stakeholders. And one of these that has become very, very popular lately are webinars. TRB does bunches of webinars, and they're usually quite good. TRB, though, prioritizes who gets to do webinars with those that are centered around an NCHRP project having highest priority. So if you're reporting on the results of an NCHRP project, and you're going to be talking about implementation, you're going to have a better chance of getting that TRB webinar approved. Federal Highway Administration does peer-to-peer exchanges, and a lot of those are going on as part of Everyday Counts initiatives. So peer-to-peers are really a good approach. And then, of course, we have meetings like this. The next thing, support the implementers. Yeah, you need to get a small group started, you need to work together, you need to learn what works. Usually, even if you can only get 4 people, that is enough to have a meaningful group activity. Need to talk to the target audience. What do they want? What do they need? What would they have to change in order to implement what you want? What are the obstacles? This is how you go about making the right thing to do also the easy thing to do. If you don't ask, they'll all just, you will get the silent bobblehead doll nodding, and you will not be making progress. So we really need to ask those questions even when we don't like the answers. Financial strategies are certainly in the medical field, they are very, very common. In engineering, they are much less common, but Jeff demonstrated the effectiveness of a $100,000 grant in getting an agency to move from not me to, oh, well, maybe we will think about it. So those financial opportunities used to be absolutely rare, if ever. Everyday Counts similarly pays little bonuses to states for implementing the Everyday Counts products. Changes to infrastructure. This is essentially, is what you're trying to implement going to require a change in your organizational chart? It is rare in an agency that the people who want to implement research actually have the authority to change the infrastructure one way or another. I was in a state agency for 27 years. They changed the organizational structure every 4 years. Gee, I wonder why. But it was never because of any input that I was ever asked to supply. So it's here because in the medical field, this was one of their items, but I do want you to know that I do understand that those changes happen, but they're usually political or otherwise not related to implementation. This one was actually the first item listed in the medical literature. I moved it to the last. This is the 10th item, and that is to use evaluative and iterative strategies. And I thought that is just way too, I don't know. All they're saying is try a variety of things, improve on them as you go, and keep improving the process over time. So it really is not as complicated as the language makes it sound. But what we want is the second generation of implementers to have a much easier time. They shouldn't have to sow new ground in order to do that implementation. So what can you do? What are some things that this group, you as an individual agency person, as a twig leader of the Committee on Maintenance or any other group, you can submit an NCHRP proposal for implementation of one of their recent projects. There is one that I noticed is due to come out very soon. It's probably in the final review. I don't know what it's going to say or if it's going to be something that people need assistance to implement, but it's worth considering because NCHRP only 2 years ago developed a small pot of money for implementation. Create that implementation task group, either in a partnership, in the AASHTO committee, in a TRB committee, in somewhere. Spend time studying the research. This is not the request that you get to review the final report. This is a review that you do to say, what are the steps that we would have to take to implement this work? Once you have those steps, it's relatively easy to identify the obstacles, okay? And whether, is this a regional thing? Do I have to adopt it? Create your small group, have a leader and regular calls. It helps if people say, okay, within the next 2 months, everybody's going to read the report, everybody's going to have the list of the steps, and we're going to have a call at that time to discuss that, and we're going to hone that down and create a standard. Okay. As soon as you have 3 or 4 state agencies actually implement the work, request FHWA funding for a peer exchange to spread it to 12 states or however many states. I had excellent results going to our district office of FHWA getting funds for peer exchanges. Make presentations at partnership meetings, at TRB, at meetings like this about the implementation. Focus on the value for the agency for implementing, but be very honest about what work it takes to get there. I remember I've been involved in several implementations, and a few of them I felt like there was some false advertising. We were led to believe it was going to be a quick and easy process, and once you got into it, it was like a swamp. Consider hosting an implementation webinar to discuss the tips and lessons that have been learned, and as more agencies implement, then bring them into that implementation work group. I've led during my DOT career, 2 major implementations myself. One was North Carolina had been doing windshield surveys for 25 years, and we went to automated distress data collection. And so what strategies did we use? Well, we got a peer-to-peer exchange and went up to Virginia to look at their system, their specifications, their proposals. It was a wonderfully helpful experience. After we actually started doing the distress survey, though, I personally checked every mile of concrete pavement in the state of North Carolina to verify that the distress that I was seeing in the survey matched distress on the road. So there is work that has to be done to make sure you're getting what you need. The second one, Pavement Design, went through a major change, the first major change since 1972. So, you know, we didn't rush into it. It was almost 40 years. But that was a huge, huge implementation effort. There were TRB workshops every year. There were webinars. There was a work group in North Carolina DOT. All different kinds of, we used every tool in the book to try and make this easier, and that process is still going on. I've got to say, implementation is not easy, but man, when you have one that actually goes through and you see it all the way through, it is very, very satisfying. So, what is the call to action? Read the report. If you don't read the report, you don't know if it's any good. You don't know if there's anything in it that you want to implement. Disseminate the findings, create your group, work within your organization, share results and improve the process, and then expand the group, and it will just continue on its own. So that was it, and we're out on time. So, any questions?
I believe the NCDOT 20-44 project is a fairly new program for implementing research, is that correct?
I think so, yes.
I'm just wondering if you have any comments to share on that, or how competitive is that process?
My sense is that the pot of money is relatively small, so your chances of getting it aren't super good. But if you do get it, eureka, you know, that's money that you didn't think you'd have. So I think it's always worth a shot.
During my tenure at DOT, one of the things that I always was frustrated with NCHRP reports was the last line, seems like in every report that I had, was further research was needed, and never came to any conclusions. And I think that's reason why some of us are a little skeptical when we get an NCHRP report. I'm wondering if there's ways to, once you're part of that oversight or the expert task group, to fix that problem of coming to some sort of conclusion, even though you may need more research, but get to a point where there's something implementable with that particular report.
I do have some suggestions on that, but it isn't free. It is, you need to get yourself on the panel for that research, and then make sure that you make a point when you talk to the researcher that you want implementable findings. They're going to always have that little, you know, future research is needed. You know, we need to just get past that. That's like, you know, we know when we have a new governor in a state, we're going to end up with a new strategic plan. So, I mean, you know, some things are just part of life, but if you're on the panel and you actually have a voice about what that researcher will deliver. I've been on many of those panels. I know Jeff has. How many people in here have been on an NCHRP panel? It takes some work, but you know, you really can make the process better.
I'm just going to say, just understand that another thing is the folks that actually, in the various committees that actually write the research problem statements. I know some of them have here now, they've actually required an implementation plan to be part of the final report.
Actually, almost all the NCHRP projects now, in their write-up for the researchers to submit their proposals, they require an implementation plan.
Very well, thank you very much.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.